Hello, welcome and thank you for visiting The Simple Storyteller. For a while now, I've felt led to read stories, mostly short stories. I've been a reader for a while, but reading aloud, I stumble a little bit, so just try to bear with me. I'm sure that I'll get better. So the book that I'm going to read today is in the public domain. It's by Grace Livingston Hill, and it's called Under the Window. The little bronze clock on the shelf over the fireplace chimed out at 7, and then took up its next hour's work of counting out the seconds to the sleeping cat on the hearth. The room was all alone and very still, having a quiet time by itself. The fire winked and blinked at the lamp, and the lamp beamed brightly back from under its homemade shade of a rose-colored tissue paper and cardboard. The carpet, a neat in grain, looked as if it knew its place and what was expected of it, namely to look prettier than it was, to wear long, not show dirt, it would not presume upon its privileges even when the mistress was out. The sofa was wide, deep, and comfortable, made of dry goods box with a wide board nailed for a back, and the whole deftly padded when covered with an old crimson shawl, the fringes too shabby to be used any longer for an outside wrap. There were curtains too. You couldn't have had them in your own room. They were nothing but cheesecloth with rows of threads pulled and tied, but they were cheap and gave a pretty air of grace and homeliness to the room. Besides that, they were held back from the windows by broad yellow satin ribbons. To be sure, the ribbons were only old pink ones, washed and dyed with diamond dye, but they were yellow and added a dainty touch to the plainness of other things. There was a small table with a red cover which held a lamp, 2 wooden chairs, a little rocker covered with a cretonne, and a stool near the hearth. Above the table was a little shelf with a Bible and a few other books. The only really elegant things in the room were a bronze clock and 2 delicate vases of Piran marble. But these were presents from some former little pupils of the mistress, and as such occupied a place of honor on the broad shelf over the wide old-fashioned fireplace. But they seemed to have made friends with the ingrain carpet, the homemade sofa, and the cheesecloth curtains, and to feel quite as much at home with the yellow ribbons as though the latter had not been real and new, not old and dyed. There were a few pictures and bright cards that smiled down from the walls, and the room kept very still and waited all alone. Now and again the white cat stirred in his sleep, opened one eye up at the clock, as though he had just heard it strike those 7 clear strokes, pushed his forepaws slowly, trembling forward in the luxury of a stretch, opened his mouth to its utmost extent, and then turned over to cuddle down again, one paw over his nose and a contented smile on his pink cat mouth. There were 2 windows in the room, one looking out on the little strip of ground between the house and the street, and the other opening to a sort of lane or alley, and this window was down from the top several inches, for the mistress had ideas on ventilation. The wind came in and stirred the curtains, even waving the least mite on the white fur on the end of the cat's tail, but the cat was used to the drafts and did not mind. He only gave his ear a little nervous jerk, as if he fancied it were summer and it were a fly biting him, though he knew better if he had only stopped to think, for here was the fire and outside was the snow blowing, and the breath of air that touched his tail was decidedly cold. There were other reasons too. His mistress had not taken the pile of books and started off for school for 3 whole days. By that he knew that it was winter vacation. Then had not old Mr. and Mrs. Updike, from whom he and his mistress rented their rooms, gone away that very morning to spend the holidays with their daughter. The cat and his mistress were alone in the house, except for Peter Kelly, who was probably at this moment sitting in his room over the kitchen, his chair tilted back against the wall and looking straight at the sputtering flame of his candle. And why didn't his mistress go away to spend the holidays and not stay all the happy Christmas tide shut up in her little room with her cat? Well, in the first place, she couldn't afford to go away. She was just a poor little school teacher with a very small salary and barely enough to support herself and her cat. For a cat she would have, she said, if she had to go without something herself. Second, she couldn't leave her cat. Who would take care of it? Not Mrs. Updike, for she hated cats. And besides, she was not at home. Third, she had nowhere to go, and so she stayed home. She had told the white cat only a few days ago that she was all alone in the world and had dropped a bright tear on his pink ear, and he had twitched his head in surprise. She was no worse off than respect than he was, and he was contented. He saw no further need for anyone in the world beside himself and her, except perhaps the milkman. But at that moment, the front door opened and closed with a bang. There was a sound of stomping and brushing in the hall. Then the mistress entered the room and seemed to smile and brighten the room seemed to smile and brighten to receive her. Bright brown eyes, golden brown hair, straight nose, cheeks flowing with the cold exercise, straight eyebrows. That's Polly Bronson. She wore a dark blue flannel dress, a black jersey coat, black mittens, and a little black crocheted cap with balls on the top. The snowflake glistened over all. She took them gaily off, laid her parcels on the table, and went to hang up her things in the small bedroom adjoining. Coming back, she seated herself on the little stool and proceeded to poke the fire, making it blaze up brightly. "Come here, Abbott," she said merrily, "while I tell you the news." The cat slowly arose, humped his back up high, curled his tail into an impossible position, and struck out each particular hair of his white coat until he looked like a porcupine and yawned. Then he closed one eye and went on and rubbed his head sideways against Polly's foot. "Oh, you lazy Abbott, wake up," cried Polly as she caught him in her arms and shook him gently. "Listen, Abbott, I've something nice to tell you. Tomorrow is Christmas, you know." Abbott gravely winked. Polly was in the habit of telling her plans to him, and he was a good listener, always agreeing with her. "Well now, if you and I were rich, Abbott, we would give each other presents, beautiful presents. People that do Christmas, that do that at Christmas. Did you know that?" The cat looked intriguingly at her with his bright green eyes. Polly's face was a picture of mock gravity as she said, "I wish I had a present to give you, my poor little cat, but I'm so sorry I have none." The cat looked disappointed. "But you shall have an extra saucer of milk tomorrow for breakfast." The cat brightened. "And Abbott, we'll have a party, you and I, and we'll invite Susie and Mamie Bryce and Joey Wilkes and little lame Tim. They're poor little children, Abbott, without any Christmas at all, and you must be a good cat and play with them and not go to sleep on the hearth for the whole evening." Abbott uttered a feeble meow as a protest, but Polly went on. "We can't have a turkey. It costs too much, Abbott. Did you know that they always have turkey on Christmas?" "Yes, and cranberries, but you wouldn't like those. They're sour." "We'll have baked beans. They're cheap, you know, and you'll like them. And Indian pudding, all baked, very nice and brown, with plenty of big fat raisins in it. And Abbott, some oysters. Yes, really, just for once. They won't cost that much, and you shall have 2 all to yourself, perhaps 3. Abbott purred contentedly and settled himself in her lap for another nap. But a gust of air from the window sent Polly in haste to close the forgotten shutters, and the cat concluded it was best to go back to the hearth. Just as those 7 strokes sounded from Polly's bronze clock, a young man stood on the snowy pavement not many blocks away, hands in his pockets, wondering how he should spend Christmas Eve. He was all alone in the city too, with not even a cat to cheer him. He had acquaintances, of course, but a few. But what were they on Christmas Eve? Some were out of town and some were in their homes at merrymaking of their own, to which they had not even thought to invite him. He told himself he wouldn't have gone if they had, and he ground his heels into the hard snow and thought of his mother's cheerful kitchen and its wide old fireplace and pleasant Christmas odors, the dear father and mother and brother and little sister, even a cat who blinkingly thought over her vanished youth, gazing into the glowing fire, how their faces would brighten if he could walk in upon them now. Indeed, he must stop such thoughts as these. He told himself that he wasn't a baby to expect always to be at home for Christmas, to hang up his stocking. But it was cold and he could not stand here much longer. Should he go back to his office? No, he had endured that as long as he could for the evening. For John Brewer was his smiling wife, who rented the room just back of his, were having their little tea drinking, and the peals of merry laughter which came from there every few minutes did not tend to make the young man feel less lonely. He dismissed quickly the idea that he should go to his dingy little room in the grim boarding house on High Street. He would call on the gentleman who left his card that day at the office with the message that he had some important business matters to talk over with him at his earliest convenience. This would be as good a time as any to call, and the gentleman would be likely to be in his room, as he was a stranger in the town. He turned and walked down the little alley, the nearest road to Park Avenue, to the Grand Hotel, and to the stranger. Halfway down the alley, he discovered he could not recall the name of the man, for he had only glanced at the card hastily and laid it on his table. He fumbled in his pocket for it, so that he might consult it at the next lamppost, but a nearer opportunity offered itself in the shape of Polly Bronson's bright little side window, and he stepped up to it as Polly entered with her bundles. He had just found the right card when he heard the cheery voice calling, "Abbott, come here." Of course he looked up, and of course, having seen and heard so much, it was not in nature for a lonely man to be haste to tramp off to make a business call on a stranger. He saw in that fireplace a little of the home of cheer of his mother's hearth. He saw in the white cat's face something of the thoughtfulness of his home cat. He saw in the young girl, well, I'm not sure what he saw in her, but you'll have to ask him. She was just Polly, something new and bright and beautiful. Yes, he stood and watched the pretty tableau enacted before him. He let his eyes rove around the little room, and he called it pretty. He did not know the curtains were cheesecloth and the ribbons were dyed. He heard every word that Polly said, too, for you remember the window was down from the top, from the presents down to the Indian pudding and the oysters, and wished with all his heart that he was poor little Tim, or somebody who could be invited to that party, listening. He said he never thought of such a thing. Indeed, he did not think of anything but the interesting picture and the story that unfolded itself right before his eyes. He did recover his senses sufficiently to remember that he was not invisible when Polly came toward the window and he stepped back into the shadow. There was a sort of blank when the shutters were closed and the cheery room was shut from his view. He did not feel in the least like making that call now. It was scarcely 5 minutes, and yet he felt that he had some new friends in the city. He had a feeling of pity for the lonely girl, and so in thinking of others, lost sight of his own loneliness. He very soon discovered that he was standing in a snowbank, stamping himself out of it. He took his way mechanically to the Grand Hotel, thinking meanwhile of what he had seen, reading between the lines of the bit of a story he had been allowed to hear. He was relieved to find that the gentleman of whom he was in search of was not in, and he went home with a pleasant little plan taking shape in his brain. It was too bad that the little girl should not have any Christmas present, he thought. What if he should send her one himself? It did not seem exactly the right thing to send an anonymous present to a young lady who had never seen him, but there certainly could be no harm in sending one to a cat. Nobody ever heard of there being any harm in that. So it's kind of a neat story unfolding that he's wanting to take part into this party, and it kind of leads your imagination to think that maybe he's gonna become involved in that. And so I'll read the next bit of the story here, and I'll put it in a playlist in a part 2. We'll see what happens as the story unfolds. Thanks for joining us.